Hi there, I'm Roberta, and I've practically grown up here. Everywhere you look, you see our family's wares, from dinner plates elegant enough for a royal ball to the mug you've used every morning for the last 10 years. It's been quite the journey, being present and witnessing and aiding my parents in the growth of their business. But one day, that all changed. Our next-door neighbor, Mrs. Wilson, from the bakery, stormed in wildly like a tornado cutting through twine. She always had a strange habit of barging in and demanding to see my dad, John, as if she owned the place. She barely knocked a shoe on the carpet before shouting, "John, I need to talk to you, pronto?" Even with the racket of my clanking the feel of a ceramic teapot into its slot on display, I paused with something short of an eye roll to watch not so silently. My dad cleansed his hands on his apron and glanced at me with eyes that seemed to say, "Here it comes." "Sure thing, Beverly. We talking 69 or 04? Here," my dad quipped. Mrs. Wilson cleared her throat, freshly magenta-dyed hair falling out of her scarf. "I'll be blunt about this, John," she said. "It's just about time we consider some bigger things about this little old business of ours, don't you think?" The voice she used was more than serious. It was as if her voice was just a tad too low to understand without asking her to repeat herself multiple times. Dad coughed awkwardly. "Merge, huh? That's quite a presumptuous suggestion, Beverly. What sudden reason do you have to harbor this thought at your mind?" But she wasn't done, leaning her body close to his. "I think we could make it even more beneficial for us by our kids, that is, Lucas and Roberta." I almost dropped the teapot. Lucas is a man in his 30s, and despite being neighbors, we barely speak a word. I could see Dad cup his chin and feel my heart plunge. They're both proper kids, and you know that. But marriage, they're how old and barely know each other. That's a bit steep, Beverly. I think they'll get along, I assure it. Plus, from a businessman's viewpoint, it's a smart idea. Dad sighed. "I'll talk to Miss Ann. She wants to merge the store and the bakery. She wants me to marry Lucas. I said, and my thoughts instantly reflected thoughts in verbal form. What do you think? I could not even imagine that. It looked like one of those old films, and getting married like that was not what I was dreaming about. "I do not know, Dad. Lucas is a nice fellow, but marry him. Maybe you need to meet properly, I suggest." "You know what? You do not need to make this decision right away. We will figure it out gradually," Dad said. So it all started. Lucas and I used those months to learn more about each other. There was something about him. He seemed to be polite at first, but later revealed that he cared about Mother's legacy. However, it was different, as if he was ready to repeat what she did, but in a more decent way. Our conversations varied from discussing her business affairs to personal matters. As a result, it felt more like a situation we discussed rather than a contract. However, the story developed further. Mrs. Wilson took care of everything, starting from the 3-candy cake from her bakery and up to the decorations she used for the windows with various items. One evening, we were discussing the guest list, and my mom came rushing with a thick stack of invitations. For a second, it felt like she was inviting the entire town over. "Roberta, dear, I have included some additional names in your guest list. Our company and I need them to be there," dropping the stack on the table with a thud that shook the floor beneath me. Kept my mouth shut, not wanting to start a fight. However, Lucas saw me clenching my fists and sneaked a hand below the table to give mine a reassuring squeeze. "She has no say in this. It is our wedding day," he whispered. The wedding flew by in a flash. I stood resplendent in my dress at the back of the hall, feeling more like a decoration in Mrs. Wilson's master plan than a bride. Dad walked up to me, a forced smile on his face. "You look beautiful, Roberta. Are you ready?" I smiled weakly back at him. Let's get it done with. In what felt like seconds, The ceremony was over, and Lucas and I were smugly declared as newlyweds. The reception was filled with loud chatter of Mrs. Wilson's cohorts who spoke more about our partnership and what we could create than our union. A few days post our nuptials, the merger was finalized. Both the stores were destroyed into that one big building, with one part being the bakery and the other the tableware section. And Mrs. Wilson was around the store on the opening day, running around as a general in her shop. "Roberta, honey, you've got to make sure those plates are aligned with the symmetry cells of the pastries." Mrs. Wilson's voice cut through the store like a precision knife. "Not quite there, honey. Fix it." I readjusted the plate, while Lucas spent his day in the bakery side, coordinating the bakers. "Hey, Robbie, the scone's gotta be fresh, do you hear?" he shouted over the noise. "I cannot hear this damned plates." "Just a day of the other side, loving the symmetry chaos," he shouted back. The springs seemed to be heavier than usual, and weeks assigned themselves into months. I began to skip half of my college classes for the sake of running the store front, helping in the bakery side, and signing all of the paperwork. One evening, she said, "Roberta, you're in business now. You don't need that degree. This is your life." She said it like it was final, her words sharp and impacts deeper than anything else. They rationalized living with it could save us money and make running the business more straightforward. However, this just meant more hours for me, and since we were a short walk from the store, there was not enough breaks from the constant oversight of Mrs. Wilson, and I was doing everything else. It started as a collaboration, but it increasingly felt like a takeover. On top of this, something irritated me more than it did usually. My dad was present less and less. One busy Tuesday morning, and I was setting up the store, and it was 15 minutes before opening, and I felt his absence. Normally, he'd be here, making jokes to start the day. Instead, it was just me and the clinking sound of ceramics. That evening, I went to my parents after dealing with customers and Mrs. Wilson's directions all day. The air in their living room was heavier than usual, and it felt like every word being thrown had to stay because no one could speak it. "Why aren't you at the store much anymore, Dad?" I said as soon as I sat down with no polite inquiries. He looked at my mom, his forehead forming a fold. Her back straightened, and she scrubbed her hands on the apron before facing me. "Roberta, your father is old. The shop is draining him. This way, I make it more manageable for everyone." Mrs. Wilson spoke. I did not want to listen to any of her business talk. I fired back, "Except that's not your call. He built this shop. You can't just shuffle him off because you think it's better." Mrs. Wilson made a scoffing noise as she shook her head. "It's a ruthless world, Roberta. Business will not care that it's a family-owned place. I need to do what's best for business." When the pandemic began, it felt like someone had taken the shop floor out from under us. Shop sales plummeted, and every day the bare aisles seemed to stare at me, telling of our struggle. During one of those cold shifts where it felt like things were terrible and might get worse, I made a choice. We could not continue sitting and waiting for things to get normal. "Lucas, we have to go online. We'll do delivery, get individual orders," I stated confidently, even though I was not sure. He seemed skeptical but nodded. "Judge for yourself, it might work. We should take it up the boss." However, I knew it would not be easy with her. Mrs. Wilson was used to operations this way, and online sales seemed risky. When Lucas and I brought the idea up, she shut us down. "We're not some tech company. We're what we are, we'll outwait it," she said, and shifted attention. I just could not watch everything collapse, so I started it anyway. After delivery was skipped, I used delivery resources to design an online dish community. I bought our accessory products and bakes at night after the bakery closed. Orders began slow, then more came. Keeping it hidden from Lucas and Mom was taxing. I was so tired, burning candles on both ends, between managing our secret sale and my day job at the shop. Nights turned to morning, and I often tiptoed home late after midnight. One night, as I entered without banging my door to prevent awakening anyone in the household, I saw Mrs. Wilson standing in the living room, her arms crossed and expression a combination of rage and sadness. "Roberta, where were you? Look at this house, and your father is asleep. Don't treat him so." "I've been working, Mrs. Wilson. We got a rush of online orders tonight," my voice worn out after too many nights like this one. "Online orders? What online orders?" Her tone sharp and accusatory when it's difficult to describe. I could feel the tension in the air, radiating as Lucas came down, drawn by the noise. "Mom, what's going on?" he inquired, the frustration and the feeling of helplessness reflected in his eyes. "Ask your wife what's going on. She's running some secret side business and neglecting all her duties around here," Mrs. Wilson interrupted, criticizing me in every word. Lucas' gaze met mine, expressing confusion. What's she talking about?" Sighing, I finally gave in, the feelings and fatigue of the last weeks slowly creeping up on me. "I've opened an online store. It's what keeping us afloat with the pandemic and everything. I thought she wouldn't have agreed, so I didn't tell you." Lucas's look was blank, the gaze alternating between me and his mom. "You should have told Anne, Roberta," he concluded before moving to his mom and adding, "and you should have been more open for her ideas." Instead, Mrs. Wilson grimly went, "This is my house, and while you're under my roof, you'll follow my rules, both of you." The argument spiraled from here. Lucas went with his mom this time, usually my ally. "Roberta, you need to learn how to balance your time better, help out around the house more." Each word was a babble in my ears. Defeated and broken-hearted that Lucas couldn't see how hard I worked to save our business, I cut back on the online orders. Mornings were now for cleaning the house. Afternoons spent running the pastry counter were painful. It was everything I had to scale back on to keep peace in my house. On an especially dreary, rain-soaked afternoon, I was straightening up the store hall when I heard the door creak open. A little girl about 8 stumbled in, clothes drenched and sticking to her skin. Her face was covered in streaks of tears as she cried. "Hey there, what happened? Are you okay?" I asked, trying to sound as kind and calming as I could. Before she could answer, Mrs. Wilson saw us from the end of the aisle. She quickly marched over, lips tight. "What is this, Roberta? We don't have time for this today. She looks like a beggar. Put her out before other customers see." Her words made my stomach twist in a painful knot. "She's just a child, Mrs. Wilson. She's clearly lost and is in severe need of help," I tried to reason. Lucas overheard his mother, and his face was unreadable as he walked over to us and observed the young girl. "Roberta, Mom is right. We can't have kids like her just running into the store. It's not good for business. Just handle it, okay?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Lucas, she's alone and frightened. We can't throw her back out into the rain." My heart pounded with frustration and sympathy. I ignored them both, leading the girl to a chair and wrapping her in a clean blanket from the back room. Made her a cup of hot chocolate, hoping it would calm her down a bit. Mrs. Wilson, however, was fuming. "This is exactly the kind of distraction we don't need, Roberta. You're responsible for any fallout from this," she warned, her voice sharp. I finally managed to calm the girl down enough to tell me her name was Sophie. She had wandered off from a nearby park and got lost. Just as she started to relax, the police arrived. They thanked me for looking after Sophie and informed me her parents had been frantically looking for her. It turns out she wasn't far from home, not at all. After the police took her away, Mrs. Wilson pulled me aside. Her face was stern and cold, and her voice was monotone as she spoke to me. Lucas just nodded along, not standing up for me. Mrs. Wilson said, "Due to your little stunt, I'm docking your pay. You took time off work to deal with this situation. You will wash dishes for the next 2 days to make up for it." That stung more than I expected it to. Scoring pot after pot, it felt like I was more of a servant than a part of the family. Lucas was always my rock, but now he was just another weight to drag me down. Every harsh word Mrs. Wilson spat at me, every nod Lucas gave, both were a reminder of how trapped I was. One morning, an ordinary customer walked into the store. He was richly dressed, his eyes scanning the establishment like he was looking for something special. When he finally noticed me, he smiled, and I asked if I could help him find anything. After he has rang up his purchases, he thanked me and then paused, his expression turning a bit more serious. "By the way, I'm not sure if you remember, but my daughter was the little girl you helped out last week, the one who got lost in the storm." I was taken aback. I did not expect this twist. "Of course I remember. She was a brave little girl. I'm glad I could help her," I answered sincerely. He smiled warmly and handed me his business card. "Well, I'm really grateful for what you did. If you ever need anything, advice or help with anything at all, just give me a call." I just looked at the card and noticed the term lawyer, Mr. Hayes. That piqued my interest, given the mess the store and the merger were in. Actually, there might be something. Could we maybe talk about a legal matter? Of course, about the business my father used to own with my mother-in-law. I ventured. "Sure," he replied with an encouraging nod. "Why don't you come by my office next week? We can go over everything in detail," he offered. Took him up on his offer, feeling a bit of relief and a bit of anxiety. In his office, I handed him the pile of documents my dad signed years ago, merging our family store with my mother-in-law's bakery. He went through them carefully, his brow furrowing more with every page. After a long silence, he looked up. "There are several significant issues here. The contract has multiple violations, which are quite concerning. I think we have a strong case here if you want to challenge this," and he offered to help me pro bono to set things right. At this point, I felt overwhelmed, but grateful once more. Thank you. I'd like that. It's just hard, you know. It's my husband's family, too." He knew. He nodded his head. "It's not only about business, it's your life we're talking about. You deserve to have control over that, and you won't be fighting alone." When I left his office, I felt hopeful and worried at the same time. Could I really go against my husband and his own mother? And what was the alternative, other than waiting for my parents' store skeletons from the inside, seeing the work of both of my parents being destroyed? This was the thought that clouded my mind as I came home that evening. I was still halfway through processing when I saw what I was greeted to. Our house was lousy, and there were several weekend guests who laughed, talked, and clinked glasses. I stopped, reeling in the sight before mother-in-law, whose face immediately gained half a serious expression. Within a few minutes, met a slightly drunk gaze with me. "Oh, there you are wandering the streets when you should be serving your guests," she bellowed from across the room. "It's your anniversary, Roberta. Don't you have any sense of duty?" My blood ran cold, and I scrambled as my face began to heat up in the room, not daring to meet anyone's gaze. The events of the day have forgotten my 1-year marriage anniversary completely. I'm sorry, I forgot. I didn't know it was today. I tried to apologize, but to no avail. She just got angrier and rosier and finally took a pizza box that was lying around next to me in a fit of frustration and stormed my way. I was able to dodge it when the pizza box I had held earlier fell onto the floor, completely useless. "Unbelievable," she shouted. Before I could say anything, before I even could fully process anything, Lucas came over. He too displayed the telltale signs of alcohol guilt. "Look at you, not even ready to eat. Wash up, for heaven's sake," he slurred, immediately letting all the wine from his glass spill over my hands and my shirt in a grotesque imitation. The cold wine seeped into fabric, staining my shirt. A shiver ran through me. The next moment, something broke. Something inside me, long-suffering and angry. Maybe it was finally sensing how these people dishonored me and my courage. Maybe it was just the wine running through me. But at that moment, I just could not take it anymore. Wiping my stained hands on my wet shirt and looking into the room, I spoke just loud enough for silence to spread around me. "I have seen a lawyer. I am filing for divorce, Lucas," I said. Lucas and his mother just looked at me as if though they saw a ghost. My mother-in-law walked closer, her voice filled with sheer ice as she spoke. "Who do you think you are? You think you can just—" I cut her off. I spoke louder, all eyes in the room glued to us. The tension was so thick in the room that it was almost tangible. "I am not finished." I swallowed and spoke as loud as I could. "I am suing to override the merger of the store. There has been a fraud, and the court has the documents. I sent them. I will also be asking for financial compensation for everything I endured here," I said. The room was silent for one moment before my mother-in-law exclaimed in outrage. I did not wait for more. I quickly turned on the heel and headed upstairs to gather all my things. My mother-in-law followed me, but her voice was no longer cold and hateful. It was desperate. "Roberta, please, let's talk about this. You're overreacting." I stopped, turned, and faced her one last time. Without saying a word, I handed her the business card of the lawyer. "From now on, any communication goes through my lawyer," I said firmly. After that, I walked to our room, my fist tight, but my intentions clear. I only packed essentials, all that I needed to start over. I finally left my mother-in-law's roof, moved into an apartment across town. It was like I felt the fresh air after ages. It was not alone, yet alone, because my father was with me. We were fighting to win back our life. The attorney, Mr. Hayes, was determined to handle our situation. In court, he was a dog. He fought to win our side. After a short while, we got the good news. The court had deemed Mrs. Wilson guilty of fraud. They arranged to break the illegal merger and fined her so much money. I finally got compensated for all the financial losses from that day. It was enough money to help me buy Mrs. Wilson's share in the joint bakery and tableware business my father. Standing in front of the business house again, all legally mine, was a good feeling. "Dad, we did it. It's ours again," I said finally, handing him the keys to the door. We spent the next weeks revitalizing the shop. After every paint coat, every new display on the rack felt like a part of soul claim regained. Mrs. Wilson and Lucas had to find a new job. The loss costs through the case and the fine dried out everything they had saved. I heard about them incurring debts, but the rest— Lucas tried calling once or send a text, but I never replied. I had locked that part of my life away. Now I was thinking of the game to secure our future. With the store and my studies back on track, I continued with college at night. It was a fresh new penny. I was aiming home after a class when Dad closed the shop. Hitting across a well-laid coffee table, Dad joked, "You know, Roberta, start again like this, that's more than I was hoping for, sass mess." "Yes, Dad, that's exactly how I feel. It's like I woke up from a long, bad dream. We have a second life here, and I'm not going to waste it," I said to him with a fresh confidence I didn't have for years. We discussed the business future undertakings, new products we might introduce, the holiday discount sale,